Hello and welcome to Woman's Hour. Well, an announcement this morning by the government that 1 or 2 word Ofsted inspection grades for England schools, which were the words were outstanding, good, requires improvement or inadequate, they are going to be scrapped immediately. And the government said the change follows the suicide of head teacher Ruth Perry in 2023 and was needed to reduce the high stakes for schools and give parents a better picture. We're going to hear reaction to and details of that change. Now, the way that Ofsted describes schools in England with 1 or 2 words, so like outstanding or inadequate, it is being scrapped with immediate effect. Last year, an inquest found an Ofsted inspection had contributed to the suicide of primary head teacher Ruth Perry, leading to widespread calls for change. You might remember her sister, Professor Julia Waters, was on Woman's Hour last year speaking very movingly about the impact of her sister's death. Here she is on the BBC giving her reaction to this Ofsted decision.
It's a vindication, really, of what we've been arguing for and what head teachers and teachers across the country have been telling me would be the most significant change to take the stress and anxiety of an Ofsted inspection away. But actually, my overriding feeling is one of relief. It was the main thing that preyed on her mind. You know, she had a really bruising inspection that left her very fragile, and that word, inadequate, she went over and over and over it. She kept repeating it. She wrote it down. And it was that feeling, not just that she'd had the terrible shock and trauma of a completely unexpected bad Ofsted, but that she was still anticipating the public humiliation that would come with that.
That was Julia Waters speaking on the BBC following the Ofsted decision to scrap single word or 2 word ratings. I'm joined now by BBC Correspondent Ellie Price to discuss these changes. Ellie, welcome to Woman's Hour. So talk us through a little bit. The plan was to try and reduce the high stakes, but also, they say, to increase transparency for parents.
That's right. And it was part of the Labour manifesto. I think there's been some surprise today that it's happened quite so quickly. So what we have today is, in essence, the scrapping of this 1 word overarching description of a school based on, obviously, a more complex Ofsted report. I think worth noting, actually, the broader system doesn't change. And what the Labour government would like to do now, and says it will do by about this time next year, is introduce the system of a report card where, in essence, it's a bit more, it sounds quite similar, to be honest, to a existing Ofsted report, but it will not use these words, the words that we have: inadequate, requires improvement, good and outstanding, but it will maybe use some kind of grading system. The details, as I say, haven't really been formalised yet.
It's interesting, I think, that they are talking about the report card, which has not been finalised yet, but have decided to remove these words anyway. Was there any explanation given for that?
Well, as I say, I think the issue is this idea of it just being too simplistic, because it's not taking into account the kind of broader light of everything that a school does. So on the issue, we had this 1 word description, and in the case of Caversham Primary School, where Ruth Perry was the head teacher, that school was rated very good or indeed outstanding in many areas, but it was just that one issue of safeguarding of children. I say just one issue; it's obviously a very important issue.
Sure. But
the point being, and it was heard at the coroner's report, that actually it was potentially more to do with paperwork and the way things were being recorded. No child was harmed in any way at that school, but because on that one issue, if you in essence failed on that one issue, your whole school, the whole report then would fail. And of course, in the UK, in England rather, that would lead often, if you have a inadequate report, it leads to a change in leadership, and often a school would become an academy and that sort of thing.
So now, how would you see support for this change? Or what are you hearing or seeing?
Certainly been
people?
Very broadly supported today by the teaching unions, as you might imagine. Obviously, all the people who've campaigned for it in the first place, on the basis that it was unfair and too simplistic, very much welcoming it, hoping that parents will find it a better way to look at a school. But I don't know if you've ever read an Ofsted report. They are long, turgid things that you've got to sit down and really read through if you really want to get to the nub of it. So I think there's some concern, certainly by the previous government, by the Conservatives today, that it will take away parent choice and take away the simplicity of a parent being able to judge how well a school is doing.
And before I let you go, Ellie, an independent review of Ofsted's response to Ruth Perry's death is expected to be published tomorrow. That's alongside further details of how inspections might change. Any details on that review coming through yet?
I don't have any details. I think probably worth noting that some changes have already been made by Ofsted. So if a school receives inadequate on the issue of safeguarding, for example, as it did in the Caversham case, Ofsted will now revisit it within 3 months of that report. And I think very importantly, actually, an inspection can be paused if a head teacher is deemed to be in severe mental distress.
You see, that is really interesting because how that would be judged or examined or investigated.
And exactly how that works in practice, I'm afraid I don't know the details, but obviously that the option is there, if you like. And of course, dealing to some extent with these concerns of the severe mental pressure it can put on a head teacher and teaching professionals, not just when the report comes out, but obviously when the inspection itself is taking place.
Ellie, thank you so much for joining us. And that is Correspondent Ellie Price. Let me turn now to Sir Michael Wilshaw, who served as His Majesty's Chief Inspector of Education, Children's Services and Skills from 2012 to 2016. We also have Emma, who's a parent campaigner from Sheffield. You're both very welcome. Michael, first to you, your reaction to this news?
Good morning. I'm pleased that this decision has been made. It's been well trailed. The new Secretary of State for Education has already said that she wanted to change this, so it's not surprising that she has. The fact of the matter is that in many ways Ofsted has lost the confidence of the people who really matter. That is the head teachers in our schools and the staff in our schools. 70% of heads do not believe that the judgments that Ofsted makes are fair, that they're consistent and are made by people who really know what they're doing. So change is absolutely necessary, particularly after this tragic death, particularly after the Education Select Committee and the coroner of the inquest into Ruth Perry called for radical change. So I'm pleased that it's coming about. I'm pleased that the Labour government are considering an alternative. I'm pleased that they're thinking about a more comprehensive report card which gives much more information to parents.
Well, you changed your mind on this topic, I understand. What was it that was the catalyst for that?
I think it was a gradual process. The first thing I should say, it's not up to Ofsted to make this call. It's really up to the Secretary of State for Education, for the government to make that decision. And when I was Chief Inspector in the Conservative administration, it was absolutely clear to me that they weren't going to change their mind on this, despite the fact that I spent a lot of my time checking on the veracity and the validity of reports and inspection findings and dealing with a forest of complaints on this one-word summative judgment. And at the end of my tenure, I felt that change was going to happen, and I campaigned for it after I left Ofsted. I mean, the fact of the matter is, if you look at a school, and schools are complex organisations, you have conflicting evidence. So you could have, I suppose, a curriculum which is really good, but the outcomes are really poor in relation to schools with a similar intake. You could have teaching which is good, but teaching could be even better if behaviour could be improved. You could have safeguarding judged good, but because behaviour is poor, it's threatening the safeguarding judgment. So schools are complex, and inspectors have to deal with that conflicting evidence. And what they do is they err on the side of generosity. They go into default mode and say, well, okay, there's a conflict here. Let's give this school a good judgment because we know the consequences of putting it into a so-called category of requires improvement or special measures. So we have this ridiculous situation at the moment where nearly 90% of schools are judged as good by Ofsted. Well, that's patently nonsense. When we know there's a wide variety of standards across the country, regional underperformances in places like the Midlands and the North and the Northwest and other parts of England. We know that poor children are falling further behind.
So you think that good is completely an over-exaggeration of what the actual situation is on the ground in schools?
It is, and it's not being straight with parents on that.
So do you have faith? I mean, we don't know the details of what these report cards will be like. It's still scant. But do you think there can be a process that will be fairly reflective of what is actually happening on the ground?
Well, a lot of work will have to go into this by both Ofsted and the Department of Education. When the report card or the details of the report card are finally published, it's absolutely essential that it has the confidence of the sector. That it does capture what I've just been talking about, the complexity of school life and the different issues that have to be judged. But I have to say this, and this is really crucial, whatever happens at the end of this period and the report card is eventually, or the details of it are eventually published, it doesn't actually solve the problem of the amount of time inspectors can give to a school. At the moment, it's just over a day. Can you really collect all the evidence that you need to make fair and consistent judgments when you only spend just over a day in a school, often just by...
How long do you think an inspector would need to be in a school to make a fair assessment?
Look, all this depends on money, and Ofsted's budget has been cut by a third over the last few years. And they've, of course, got to inspect not just schools, but further education and prison education and children's services, and I could go on. Now, Ofsted quite simply hasn't got the resources to spend more time in schools unless the government decides to increase its budget. So I would say, yes, reform is necessary, but inspectors need to spend more time in a school, at least 2 days, it seems to me. At least 2 days.
And more money, as you say, as well. Thank you so much for joining us, Sir Michael Wilshaw, who served as His Majesty's Chief Inspector of Education, Children's Services and Skills from 2012 to 2016. I'm going to go to Emma in just a moment, but can I come back to Ellie for just one moment? Anything said about the funding, about whether it will increase, just following on from Sir Michael's point there?
The Education Secretary, a little bit hazy, as you might imagine this morning when questioned about it. The money will come for what's also being introduced, which are regional, what are they calling them? Regional, sorry, I'm trying to find my notes where it's got the actual name of it. Basically, teams in each region that will kind of help school improvements in certain areas. The money for those will come from the levy on private school fees, the tax of private school fees, which they said is said to be enough. As for Ofsted, I think sort of all a bit up in the air at the moment. Of course, we've got a budget coming in a few weeks' time. And
that is Bridget Phillipson, who's the Secretary of State for Education. Right. You might have heard her on the Today programme this morning. Let me turn to Emma, who's been waiting patiently. Good to have you with us. So your daughter's school was rated inadequate in September 2022. What was the ramifications of that?
Yes, so she just started at the school. She'd been in year 7 for a couple of weeks, and we didn't find out about this inadequate, which happened like Ruth Perry School in Caversham, just on safeguarding. Until January, there was a lot of back and forth between the school and Ofsted, and for us, this meant forced academisation. So immediately, the school that we had chosen, had selected for, this is a really popular, it was and is the last local authority secondary school in Sheffield, was basically going to have new management, could turn over everything from uniform, curriculum, staffing, everything about this school.
Because it was becoming an academy, and that was the law. If it had certain ratings of inadequate for a number of times, it had to become an academy.
It triggered it immediately, and there was nothing anyone could do about that. And when we as parents started to ask more information about this process, how is it selected, we then realised that the community, the parents, nobody with any relationship to the school had any say in this. The Department for Education would choose an academy, and that would be it. And my daughter had just started at this school, and I have 2 younger children. This is our catchment school. We were potentially going to be there for a very long time with no other options. And so, this triggered a very, very large and in the end successful parent campaign.
A successful parent campaign. So what happened to help the school improve?
Okay, so when we had the letter in January with the Ofsted report, the school said it had already made the necessary changes that it believed that Ofsted had identified. It was around risk assessments, staff having up-to-date training, etc. They asked for Ofsted to come back and inspect. We as parents supported that. We had a large petition saying, the school said it's made the changes. Let's see if that is in fact the case before we make these massive changes. Local MPs, we had so much support from everybody who said this isn't the right path for this school. It was a long process. We were pushing back on various bits of it. An academy was chosen, which we were very unhappy about. The school wasn't informed. Nobody was informed. It was sort of all done very secretively. So we managed to delay the process through that campaign. And then in, I think it was May, the same academic year, so 2023, Ofsted came back to see how the school was doing. They decided that the school was doing so well, they turned that into a full inspection and it was back to good. So in the space of one school year. I think it shows, what has been said about perhaps it being a flawed process, not a consistent process or reliable process.
So you are welcoming this news today, I would imagine.
I am welcoming this news because that single word judgment on one area of the school where there were lots of other very positive things about the school had led to what could have been a very destructive
but with that, you will have heard from Sir Michael also, Ellie, outlining some of the unanswered questions when it comes to the new way of doing things. Does that give you pause?
Yes, it's good news, but we need to see what the new process looks like. And I think I would personally like to see a lot more working with schools than against schools. There didn't seem to be anything about wanting our school to improve or working with the school to address any changes. It was just, no, you failed, you're done, we're taking over. And I think that process isn't helpful to anybody. I think we should be learning from schools that are doing well. I think we should be collaborating, and I think we should be supporting schools to make changes where they're needed.
And what's the most helpful support, do you think? You've just gone through that process for schools that are deemed to not be meeting expectations.
Yeah, I think working with the schools, already changes had happened because inspectors now come back 3 months after an inadequate safeguarding to see if changes had been made. That would have been very helpful to us. That's what the school had been asking for. So an idea of how improvements can be made. I think there was some I saw this morning about working with other schools to collaborate and improve on areas where it's needed. Schools, this is a school that has an intake of 1,700. It has a massive sixth form. You can never sum that up in one word, ever.
Right. And maybe not in one day, according to Sir Michael as well. Emma, a parent campaigner from Sheffield, thank you so much. Ellie Price, BBC correspondent, thank you so much also for coming in studio. And as you were hearing as well, Sir Michael Wilshaw, who was also chiming in on this topic that many of you have strong opinions on. I want to stay with education for a moment. Something coming up for your diaries on Tuesday, the 10th of September, as the new school term in England gets underway. We will be dedicating an entire programme to SEND, so how mothers are bridging the gaps in the special educational needs and disabilities system. More than 1.5 million children in England alone have special educational needs and disabilities, but Mums tells us it is a broken system. They say there's constant and exhausting battles as families fight to get a suitable education for their children. We're going to be joined by the EastEnders actress Kelly Bright. Her son has autism spectrum disorder, also ADHD and dyslexia. We'll have 17-year-old campaigner Katie Nellis, who lost years of education due to her poor experience of the SEND system, and also by head teachers and special needs teaching assistants. And, of course, we want to hear from you. We want to talk about what happens when your child with SEND does not get an appropriate school place, about the quality of provision for those that do, and also what it feels like to be a mum who is navigating the system. So many of you have got in touch. If I haven't got back to you personally, I know a lot of you also messaged and emailed. Forgive me, but I know this is something that so many people are being interested in. The best way to do it is contact Woman's Hour in the usual ways with the experiences you want to share. Include a line in your message to say that you're happy for us to keep your contact. That way we have more time to get back to as many of you as we can. That's Woman's Hour asking, is the SEND system working? Coming up on the 10th of September.